Agencies that specialize grow faster. Every vertical that's worth pursuing is being pursued. And so it's not going to be easy. It's going to require a lot of work. This decision will impact the next 5 to 7 years of your life. It's never too late. Welcome to the Deep Specialization Podcast, the show where we blend focus, strategy, and client intimacy in order to scale and simplify our businesses and our lives. I'm your host, Corey Quinn. Let's jump into the show. Hey crew, Corey here. Today, I'm going to give you 3 steps to choosing a vertical market for your agency. Now, this is a topic that I love to talk about. I've been doing this specific work for a couple of years now and have worked with a lot of different agencies of different shapes and sizes and helping them to wrestle with this concept of this idea of taking a vertical market approach, and even further, like how do you do that effectively? And so I'm excited to bring these 3 steps to you. Within these are some obvious things as well as some nuanced aspects to this process that I think are really impactful, that will ultimately help you to choose a vertical that will serve you for the long term versus, let's say, in 6 months, you realize, hey, this was not the right thing for us, and you end up pivoting and losing all that time. So I care about long-term success. So this process is very intentional. It's also, as I said, intended to help you to choose a great vertical market for your company, for your strengths, for your agency, so that you can have long-term success. Let's start by talking about a common myth when it comes to choosing a vertical market for your agency and really going deep with that. I call it deep specialization. And that common myth is that it's something around the idea about, by focusing on, let's just say, plumbers instead of all of home services as a vertical market. As a result of doing that, I'm going to be limiting my ability to grow and to do business and to ultimately reach the goals that I wanted to reach by starting my business in the first place, which is, of course, in many cases, it's around creating the kind of lifestyle you want, having the freedoms that you want, making the type of income that you want, being able to be generous with other people. And, if you've ever met a founder, which I'm assuming many of you are founders listening to the show, I know that you have a very strong opinion about, what you're trying to create in your life. And that bias, we have that human bias. It's a concept from behavioral economics called loss aversion, which is where the pain of losing something is somehow psychologically more powerful than the pleasure of gaining something, right? If you've ever had a gym membership that you rarely use, then you know what I'm talking about. Sure, you could save money by canceling that membership, but then you'd lose the potential of actually going to the gym. And as a result of this loss aversion, this human bias that we have of worrying too much about unnecessarily limiting your business's potential and your growth, founders, what they end up doing is they don't fully commit themselves to a vertical. They may dabble with a couple. I've been on hundreds of agency websites, and it's common to see industries we serve, and it's a pull down menu on the menu bar of their website. And of course, you see 5, 6, 10, 20 different verticals that they say that they specialize in, or they just stay a generalist, right? They decide not to have a specialization when it comes to an industry focus. That's where people end up most of the time when they're struggling with this limiting belief. And the truth is that agencies that specialize grow faster. In 2023, there was a research report by Promethean Research, which is a specialist research company focusing on the agency space. What they found is that specialized agencies grew 93% faster than pure generalists. And if you're a founder that cares about growth and achieving big results, then that's a pretty interesting stat. Plus, a big benefit is that when you specialize through repetition, because by specializing and serving one audience, solving a specific problem over and over and over again, you have a true opportunity to master that craft. And of course, that mastery becomes your expertise, which builds your brand, which further separates you from your competition. It reminds me of the old Bruce Lee quote, I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. There's another big benefit that I think is worth mentioning, which is that specialized agencies tend to command a higher premium when it comes to what they get offers from acquirers when compared to generalist agencies. And of course, this is because specialized agencies are inherently less dependent on the founder, and therefore they are more attractive to new owners. So if you were going to buy an agency, let's say you were an investor or you were part of a larger agency or maybe a holding group, and you wanted to buy an agency, you would probably pay more for an agency that was completely self-sufficient if you were going to go into the market and acquire an agency that was fully founder dependent on the founder for the sales. They were the source of all the sales. They closed the sales. They were the head of operations. Every client had their cell phone number. If you think about the asset that this founder has created, it really is a business revolved around them. And it becomes, of course, a much less attractive asset to buy from an acquirer or from an investor's perspective, because there is so much risk in that founder. What happens if they're no longer involved, if they decide to move on with their life? What really have you bought? Versus, of course, the specialized agency that may have systems and processes and people who can be quickly trained to fill vacancies and whatnot, even at the leadership level, even at the highest level of the organization. When you are a specialist agency, there's a higher propensity for you to be able to be much more system and process driven. There's plenty of examples of agencies that have successfully transferred and transformed from being a generalist to a seven-figure, sometimes a high seven-figure, an eight-figure agency that specializes in a vertical market. The first one, of course, that comes to mind for me is Scorpion. So I used to work at Scorpion. I was their chief marketing officer from 2015 to the end of 2021. When I joined, we were in primarily one vertical market, technically two, but we were focusing on attorneys and hospitals. And then we were able to grow that from there to home services and medical practices and franchise businesses and whatnot. That actually helped us to propel all the way to a nine-figure agency. We were doing about $200 million. But there's others. There's Blue Corona, Rhino Strategic Solutions, iLawyer Marketing, Cardinal Digital Marketing, Market My Market, and so on and so forth. In fact, all of those businesses, their founders have been guests on this show. If you're interested in any of those stories from being a generalist going to a specialized vertical focused agency, those are all available here on the podcast. And of course, the good news is that it is not too late for you to specialize. It's never too late. Maybe you built your business up as a generalist and that's worked for you for a while, as it does for many. And you realize that, hey, it's time for me to specialize and get some of these benefits that we've been talking about here. So before I get to the 3 steps, I want to share with you some concepts to help you identify what makes a good vertical market to target as an agency. And the first one is revenue. When you're looking at different vertical markets, and particularly serving local service businesses, you want to make sure that the average business in that vertical market is making a minimum of $1 million. Not the most successful business in that industry, the average industry. And here is why. If you use a rule of thumb that says 10% of a company's gross revenue should be invested in sales and marketing, it could be less, could be 6%, 7%. But we'll use a rule of thumb of 10%. If they are $1 million company, the average business in this vertical market that you're considering or you have targeted is doing $1 million, that means round numbers, they're going to invest $100,000 or 10% of $1 million into their sales and marketing. And as a digital marketing agency, you're going to obviously help them spend some of that $100,000 over a 12-month period. Of course, that translates into $8,300 a month. And when you look at things like website and reputation management and PPC and SEO. And all of a sudden that marketing budget gets dwindled down pretty quickly. So you want to make sure that the businesses have enough money on average to have a decent or a healthy marketing budget that makes your job much easier, clients that are much more pleasant to work with. The next one is community. There are verticals that have a tight knit community aspect to them. The reality is, verticals are kind of like villages, right? Everyone kind of knows everybody else. Everyone's in like a 1 to 2 degree separation from each other. And you want to use that to your benefit, of course, by providing excellent services and providing great results for people in that vertical. Your reputation will spread. And so you want to find those verticals that happen to have a really tight-knit community and industry, people who hang out together a lot, because the word about you will spread more quickly, which is a benefit. Obviously, you want to find verticals that have a lot of jargon, right? They use a lot of inside words. I think about one of the vertical markets that we targeted at Scorpion was the franchise industry, and they've got a whole plethora of different terms and acronyms that they use that are really relevant to their business, that if you are not from that business or you're not involved in the business as a specialist, it's pretty easy to notice, that you don't know these terms, right? And so you want to be able to find a vertical that has a lot of jargon so that you can learn the jargon and become an insider through using that language. It's a good signal. Obviously, you want to find verticals that are growing. It makes it much more difficult to be successful. It's work regardless of whether or not the vertical is expanding or growing or not. However, for those verticals that are shrinking, it makes it more difficult. Budgets are shrinking, people are getting laid off, versus those that are growing. The one that comes to mind is cybersecurity. It's growing like 10% per year every year. It's a very, very rapidly growing industry. So when you're in that industry, there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of dollars, a lot of companies, wanting to grow and eager to grow to capture some of that growth as well. So making sure that your target verticals are growing would be a positive thing. One other aspect that you want to look at is, are there professional requirements in order to operate a business in this industry? So an example is, my wife is a physician. She's a doctor. So she went to high school and college and then medical school and then her fellowship. And it took her many years, many, many years to be able to get to the position where she can practice her career, her craft as a practitioner, as a medical practitioner. And of course, she's very committed to growing her practice. This is who she is. And this is part of her identity in some respects, being a doctor. And so she's very committed, versus on the other end of the spectrum, where you have industries where you have no professional requirements. You typically have what you typically find, or it's more likely to find, business people or business owners are less likely to invest in their marketing. They're more flaky, changing brand names and whatnot. It's just more transient in some respects. So ideally, they have some level of professional requirements, not absolutely required for that. There's certainly many agencies focusing on verticals that don't have this that are very successful, but that's a nice thing to look out for. And then the last one I'm going to mention here is associations and conferences. There is a great website you could check out called the directoryofassociations.com. You could use that as a resource to see if you're thinking about targeting a specific vertical market. You want to make sure that they have these associations and conferences and events, because these are obviously opportunities for you to engage and interact with these folks. And if they don't have associations or conferences and events, then it's likely that they are not significant enough of a vertical. There's not enough infrastructure there that may be a signal that it may not be worth pursuing as a focus vertical. I'll give you a quick example that applies to all of these. If we look at the world of dentistry here in the United States, there's 191,497 practices in the United States. They have a lot of associations, everything from the American Dental Association to regional associations and so on and so forth. You certainly have to have a degree to become a dentist, right? There's a professional requirement, as well as, there's good revenue potential in the industry. There's some consolidation there with venture capital, but there is a demand for dentistry that's never going to go away. It may change and evolve over time. And certainly there's a close-knit professional community. There are Facebook groups with tens of thousands of dentists. There's great conferences. There's one called the Greater Dental something of New York that we used to go to. And it's literally like football fields of booths and dentists everywhere. I mean, there's just, hundreds of them. Those are some key characteristics to keep in mind as we step into this 3-step process. Hey, it's Corey. I wanted to take a quick break from the show to say that if you're an agency owner looking for a strategic and reliable white label partner, you should check out E2M. They offer website design, WordPress development, e-commerce solutions, SEO, PPC, and content writing. And they are trusted by over 300 agencies. You can check out E2M's transparent and flexible pricing model at e2msolutions.com/the Deep Specialization Podcast. For limited time, E2M is offering a special 20% discount for the Deep Specialization Podcast listeners on your first month. Go check them out. Now, back to the show. Now, before I share what these 3 steps are, I want to let you know that where people get this process wrong, these 3 steps, is they actually skip steps 1 and 2, and they jump to step 3. And you'll see why here in a minute. So we're going to start with step 1, which is you want to gather the wisdom that already exists within your business, right? So if you're going through the process of identifying which verticals do we want to target, what you really want to do is you want to actually pause and take a look at your actual business, your existing business. And what people forget is that there's a lot of wisdom that is already available to you within your business. So what you do here is, in order to sort of capture this wisdom and harvest it, is you want to take a quantitative approach, which means you want to look at the figures, the math that exists. And the way you do this is you go into your book of business and you want to group your current and past clients by vertical. So if you've had, let's say, 50 clients over the last couple of years, you want to group them by dentists and attorneys and manufacturers and cybersecurity software companies, whatever those verticals are for you. You want to group them by vertical. And then you want to look at the data comparatively vertical against vertical. So things like, what is the average revenue per client per vertical? You also want to look at things like retention rates. Retention rates are indicative of product market fit, meaning the services you provide, what you're good at doing is also really providing a ton of value for your clients, so much that they stay with you. You also want to look at things like, which verticals do we get the most organic inbounds from, or from referrals? Where are we already known? Where do we have some evidence of true impact for the vertical market? In addition to quantitatively analyzing your book of business, you also want to look at it from a qualitative perspective. This is really about going into your business and talking to your team and understanding what their preferences are. You may be surprised when you go and talk to your sales team about which vertical market they like selling to. If you have a sales team, it's likely that they're going to want to sell to people who they are successful selling to. In other words, people who buy from them. Psychologically, salespeople typically have more confidence, more momentum when they're selling to a specific type of client that they know that they're going to be successful. And so there's some evidence there that maybe some of the verticals that they're selling into, they just feel like it's an easier vertical to sell into. It's a better fit. They like selling to them. All those are really interesting sort of qualitative data points. And then you also want to ask your account managers, the people who are managing your clients on a day-to-day basis, who do they prefer to work with? Out of all the book of business that they're working with, maybe they're working across verticals and with a bunch of different types of clients and verticals. Which ones do they prefer to work with? And by the way, account managers like to work with happy clients. They don't want to work with the unhappy clients because those are typically harder to deal with and there's some emotion there. The happy clients, ones who are just thrilled to be a client getting great results, well, those are the ones that the account managers typically gravitate towards. And so you want to understand which of your clients, according to your account managers, are getting the best value. So that's step 1, is really going into your business and harvesting the wisdom that exists. That's a really great evidence that you can go and make a high quality decision ultimately using that data versus, just using intuition, let's say. Step two is I want you to ask, do I give a damn? So what you want to do is you want to gauge whether you actually care about the vertical market and the people within it. Today in the world we live in, empathy is an important ingredient. And when you truly care about your clients and their industry and the struggles that they have, that will actually separate you from your competitors. We live in a transactional world, and that empathy is that differentiator. If you're able to express and demonstrate empathy certainly over a long period of time, that will help you to really stand out in the market as someone who is a special resource for these folks in this industry. One client of mine was an agency that had been around for about, let's say, 5 to 7 years. And they've done work. They did brilliant work. They do really great lead gen using digital marketing, and they're very sophisticated sort of strategies. And they've been doing work from everything from entertainment venues to professional sports teams to healthcare companies. And we went through this process together. And the vertical that they ultimately chose was something that's called digital health, which is healthcare, like apps and things of that nature that are related to healthcare, but also have a very strong digital aspect to it. And the reason why was the founders were both very, they cared a lot about promoting health. They lived healthy lifestyles, and they wanted to promote the healthy sort of living approach in their company. And they also wanted to support other businesses that did that. That really, helped to lighten them up, and that really excited them that they could build a whole agency around this idea of digital health. And so that was a real clear win for them. They definitely give a damn about the industry they're targeting. There's another example of Chris Yano. He's the founder of Rhino Strategic Solutions. When I interviewed him and I asked him, why did he choose home services as a vertical to specialize in? And he said it's because, in part, that he grew up on a farm, and he just could easily relate to blue collar workers. Those are his people, right? And so he found that an easy market to really see himself spending most of his career in. So I wonder what that is for you as you're thinking about these vertical markets. Maybe you've gone through and you've harvested some of the data and had some of the questions in your organization about where do we, which vertical markets are our strongest, are our best. Maybe you're at that point now where I want to challenge you to think about, do you give a damn about this vertical market? Like, can you see yourself working with these folks for a long period of time? So that's step number 2. Number 3 is I want you to run the numbers on the vertical. Maybe it's a small handful of verticals that you've identified through steps 1 and 2. What most people do is they go right to this step number 3. They want to look at the size of the market and see how much revenue is available. Of course, by skipping steps 1 and 2, you end up choosing a vertical based on, I think, not the best reason, which is, I can make a lot of money. Of course, every vertical that's worth pursuing is being pursued. And so it's not going to be easy. It's going to require a lot of work, which is why steps 1 and 2 come before step 3. As I mentioned when I was opening up this episode, is that a lot of founders, they're skeptical of specializing, of cutting off, different markets by specializing due to that, so that the loss aversion human bias that we all have. But it's when you run the numbers after doing steps 1 and 2, you run the numbers on the verticals that look good to you at this point, and that's when you really get committed. So I want to give you an example of what I mean by this. If you look at the industry, the plumbing industry in the United States, there are roughly 157,000 plumbing businesses in the United States, right? These are plumbing businesses that, various shapes and sizes that serve residential customers, people like you and me who have a house, we've got some plumbing, and, we call them from time to time. And so if, let's say that as a result of doing step 1 and step 2, plumbers was one of your vertical markets, you want to look at not only the total addressable market or the total size of plumbers, But I also want you to think about if you were able to just capture 1% of the vertical market of plumbers, that would be 1,570 plumbing businesses as clients. Now, that's a lot of clients for some, not a lot for others. But if you were able to generate those clients, 1%, just one tiny little sliver of the market, 1%, as I said, you be at 1,570 plumbing clients. And let's say on average, you make $10,000 a year in profit, or maybe just in top line revenue. You would have a $15.7 million agency solving the same problem for the same audience over and over and over again, building up your specialization, your expertise, and getting really, really damn good at it, building a great reputation around it. So I want you to go out and find some data about each of the verticals that you are thinking about targeting. A good resource for this that I love using is IBIS World, ibisworld.com. And go out and find what's like the total addressable market, or like what's the total number of businesses that you could reasonably sell to. And then my rule of thumb is to multiply the size of the vertical, the number of businesses in that vertical, by 20%. So that's the Pareto principle, the 80-20. We're assuming that only 20%, small percentage of the total addressable market is going to be really the center of the bullseye for you. Then I want you, after multiplying that by 3%, I want you to multiply that by the average revenue per client in that vertical market. So again, it is go out and find the total number of businesses that you could potentially sell to in this vertical market, multiply that number by 20%, then multiply that number by 3%, multiply that number by the revenue, the average annual revenue of a client in this vertical market. What that will result in is that you get a revenue number that you should expect to be making as an agency from this vertical market in 3 years. Now, if that number ultimately excites you, then that vertical market is probably a pretty good option for your agency. And if not, then you probably want to find a different vertical, because this number has to really excite you because, look, there's a lot of work ahead. It's not going to be easy street. It's a long-term commitment, but the promise of the revenue combined with the care and the evidence of that you do great work here really help you as a founder to what I consider to be fully committed. That's when you typically get a founder who is really, really committed to doing this, and they're no longer worried about what if. All right, I want to wrap up here with a couple of common pitfalls that you want to avoid. Number one is avoid choosing a vertical market that is too small. So any vertical market that's beneath 2,000 businesses, probably not big enough to really focus in on. There's probably not enough revenue there. It's not enough opportunity inherently in that vertical market, just by the nature of the small size of it. The second common pitfall is picking a declining industry. You do not want to be focusing in on an industry that's contracting because it makes it that much more difficult for you to be successful. The next common pitfall is selecting a vertical that you genuinely don't care about. You're going to be spending long time with these folks. You're going to be going to their conferences. You're going to be meeting with them. You're going to be building direct relationships. Shoot, you may even find some fantastic lifelong friends in this industry. And if it's just a vertical market you cannot see yourself or get excited about spending time with, then I would probably reconsider that vertical. And the last common pitfall is not validating the market size and potential. Maybe you're making a decision based on what your competitors are doing or what everyone's talking about online or even what AI is telling you to do. I would prefer that you go out, and I'd recommend this obviously, is to go out and do your own market sizing research to really understand what's available and then what's the revenue potential for you specifically. Okay, as we wrap up, a couple pieces of advice. Take the time to validate your choice. Go through these steps, have these discussions, do the research, run the math, do the numbers, because once you do this, you will have the clarity that you need, which will lead to the confidence that is required to really move into this vertical approach. This decision will impact the next, 5 to 7 years of your life. So I want you to really think deeply about it and take your time to make a high quality decision. As a next step for you listeners, you can download a workbook that will help you along this entire process, along with the full audiobook version of my book, Anyone, Not Everyone. That's at anyoneNotEveryone.com. I cover this process in greater depth in my chapter 5. And so by going to anyoneNotEveryone.com, you'll get access to the workbook and the audiobook for free. So again, it's anyoneNotEveryone.com. Thanks so much, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Deep Specialization Podcast. If you haven't checked out my best-selling book, Anyone, Not Everyone, you can download the audiobook for free right now by going to anyoneNotEveryone.com. That's anyoneNotEveryone.com. And finally, a special thank you to our sponsor, E2M. We'll see you in the next episode.